fine automobile working on today. It's a '03 Lexus ES300. They were pretty similar for a long time, quite a few years, like around 2000 and up. So this concern with this car was it wouldn't start. Did a little basic troubleshooting. The problem is actually the starter. Here's a little bit of a knowledge on how starter works. This has a big positive cable going to it, and then it has a small wire going to there. So basically, the big positive cable hooks up to this part of the solenoid, but it doesn't transfer down to this lower nut, which eventually goes to the motor, until it sees voltage on the small wire. So if your starter is not starting, a couple things you want to check. You could check for positive here. If you don't have positive on that big cable, you got major problems, like a fusible link or something really big. But typically, we're doing more of our diagnosis on the small wire. Here's what that looks like on the car. Here's your big wire, the B plus battery terminal, and then here's your smaller wire. This is the one that we're going to want to check to see if we're getting voltage on while someone is holding the key in the start position. So you could back probe there. Another kind of more of a flat rate trick is if you have somebody hold the key and you smack that starter with a hammer. If it does make it start, it's because the starter's defective, whether it's a bad segment in the motor or the brushes are sticking or whatever. If you smack it and it works, you need a starter. So that's how I got this one here. He was stranded about 45 minutes away. I went and smacked on it, got it here without having to pay for a tow. So once you figure out what you got, if you're gonna do the starter, this job is for you. If you're just trying to do some diagnosis, I'll help you a little further. This signal on this small wire comes from a relay in here. And you can find out where your starter relay is. This one I did a little bit of troubleshooting, so I vaguely remember. In this one, it was this purple one. So a real down and dirty quick check is if someone turns the key to start position and this relay clicks, that tells you this side of the relay, the number 1 and 2 side, is working. So 1 sends in voltage and 2 will essentially be grounded when you try to actually crank the key. And sometimes they work the other way. Sometimes 2 is grounded and 1 will only send voltage when you try to crank the key. So basically, if you feel this and you feel it clicking with every time you try to crank the key, that tells you essentially this control side of the relay is good. So that's like your park neutral, your neutral safety switch, your actual ignition switch, whatever. If it doesn't click at all, A, it could be the relay, but B, it could also be neutral safety, which is actually out here. It's on the transmission. It's on this transaxle. Going to be down here by where the shift cable goes in. Or B, if it's a problem with the ignition switch itself, you're not going to get clicking relay. This one clicked, so the next step is if this relay clicks, that doesn't necessarily tell us about these numbers over here on the left. A little bit. Those numbers there, 5 and 3. That doesn't necessarily tell us that the contactor between 5 and 3 is good. It tells us that contactor is closing. Click, click. That's the click. The click is caused by the 12 volts in the ground here, which magnetize this electromagnet, and it pulls this over. Click. Right? But just because it clicks doesn't for sure mean there's a good contact between terminals 5 and 3. So what you could do, there's a map, right? You could check for voltage at 5, and you could actually jumper 5 to 3, and that will 100% bypass this relay. And if that makes it work, that's because you have a bad relay, in which case you need a relay. And another little flat rate tip, if the relay is not clicking, you can kind of override the 1 and 2 and just actually take the relay out and jump 5 and 3, even without the park neutral, the neutral safety switch or the ignition switch working. Not really teaching you how to steal cars, but to do some troubleshooting, this is kind of your base point right here. Now all that stuff checked out for me. It clicked. I jumped 5 to 3. I verified 5 was getting voltage. 3 was getting voltage once I jumped it. You could also get a relay test kit and test it with the relay still installed, but I do things how I want to do them, and I don't need to spend the money on the tool. So if you're getting voltage for sure down to here, you know, if there's 12 volts making it to this point, it's not working, it's your starter. Go ahead, smack it with a hammer. It'll probably make it work. So this was literally in a parking lot with, I brought 2 tools. I brought a power probe voltage tester and a hammer. So as soon as I found out this relay was working, smack on it, we're rolling. Now, part 2. That's a little bit of an explanation on how to do some troubleshooting. And if you really are struggling with that, if you get the starter out and you hook a positive jumper cable here and a negative jumper cable here, it won't work until you actually power this, right? Power this solenoid connects this to this one. So you could actually test it. That's what the parts store is going to do to test it off the car. But we know what we got. So let me take a step back, slop these parts back in, and I'll show you how I got to the point where I can access the starter. So this is more what you're gonna come up with at first. You only really need 3 sizes: 10 millimeter, 12 millimeter, 14 millimeter. A lot of your first stuff is gonna be 10s, so like the airbox, 10 millimeters, a 10 on the back side. It'll have to kind of pick up and prop out. A 10 looses the duct clamp. You got to disconnect your mass airflow sensor, squeeze and pull. You're gonna have to undo this purge line, disconnect the purge solenoid. Gonna have to pull a few vacuum lines. This is where people screw up. I've seen it a million times. They snap one of these off, and then you got to replace the airbox lid. So get those out, take it out like this. I like to set my stuff in order, so when I go to put stuff back together, I don't have to think about it. I just put it together in the opposite order I took it off. The next for this one, there's 10, a 10, and a 10, but you sort of have to like pry back this cover. You could remove this whole cover, but my experience with these types of clips, they don't really like it. This is an older car, so I would just pry it back carefully, pull those bolts out, boom, you get that baby out. Then you'll disconnect your negative battery terminal, your positive battery terminal, undo the bolt here to the radiator support and the nut that goes to the stud. Take your battery support off. I put the battery stuff on this side typically. This I'll need, you know what? I got my little camera holder. I'm gonna slide it in here so I can keep you alive. So a battery might be a little chunky. Okay. Of course, a lot of starter problems are actually the battery, but you know, if you troubleshoot right, and I have with this one, it won't be right. Then you get that out, you pull a little battery tray. You could have done the battery first. It's either way, it's all good. And then this has some 10 millimeters down there, a few 10s, a couple things to disconnect here. It's kind of funny. This has got like maybe a vacuum switching solenoid or something. So one connector. The vacuum line should already pretty much be undone. We'll get this out of there. There's your 3 10 millimeter bolts I took out. Set it here. Next, there is this airbox support bracket. A couple 10 millimeters there. Take that out. Next, we've got this duct, fresh air duct. Take that out. Now we're more or less where we were. The starter will be sitting down in here, right at the case between the transmission and the engine. And you'll undo this, was a 12 millimeter. This is a squeeze and pull. And then these are 14 millimeter bolts that are going through here into the transmission case. Sometimes they go to the engine. Then you'll pull that old starter out, as I have, set it down, and now we're basically ready to pick up with the reinstall. Alright, so for here, I might as well just keep you live. So I'm going to show you unscripted, no edits, no nothing. I'm going to do my best to keep the camera at a good angle, but this is a little bit tricky. So I'm going to hang the new starter in there, as you can see. And you'll slow me down a little bit, but I'm still going to crank it out. This is like If you do this for a living, you should be able to really do this starter like a half hour. For sure under an hour. I think a half hour would be pretty good pace. So I like to use my extension with a 14 swivel. Sneak it down in there. Okay. And if I drop it, I'm going to be mad. I'm going to blame you. So part of it's just wiggling the starter so that the bolt will start. I would not start these with the gun. Now, if you're new, hey, that's your fault. If you're new, you really need to be torquing everything to spec. But I'm not new, so I'm gonna slam this job out because I actually got to do this job, and then I got to teach online in like under an hour, and I'm trying to get this job done and returned and back for that class. So I'm gonna be slamming stuff out with the impact gun to my preferred torque specs. So in that way, I'm not really teaching you very well today, but I don't need to make a video to show you how to tighten bolts. I know pretty much what I got with my gun. That's about what I want it torqued to. The next step, I'm going to deal with the little stud and nut. Actually going to zoom in a hair. But it'll be easy to get it out of frame, so I'm not going to do it for long. But you can see, if I land this, oh, you know what, it's already got a nut. And this was a Bosch starter, so this is a good brand. But I prefer the factory nut with the built-in lock nut, which is kind of like an assembly rather than the two-piece. So I'm going to reuse the factory one. So this should sit on here just right. See what I'm saying? Getting out of frame. Okay, and then again, and this one I will actually do by hand. What I found is if you really do over torque these, you'll actually bust stuff off in the end of the solenoid. So I'm just going to grab a quick ratcheting wrench here. It's 14, right? Bingo. Or was it a 12? It was a 12. It was a 12. So probably spec is not very high. It's probably under 10 foot-pounds. About good and tight there. Reconnect that small wire. So boom. Currently the starter is done. Obviously, with automotive stuff, you're removing 5 things to do one thing, and this is no different. With the starter in, again, now I'm thinking like, what do I do next? But look at my layout. Let me get this. And this one kind of like stuck in here in that ballpark, and I'm gonna have it lined up with its hole, but I may not actually put that bolt in yet, but I'm at least gonna start getting stuff assembled. These, and I kept the bolts together. So, right here. And this was, again, this bracket is really to support that airbox shoe. Pretty typical. Okay, done with the 14. Trade off the 14 for the 10. And I'm gonna stay on the 10 for a little while. Oh, I put it back. That's right. I'm being a good boy, putting my tools back. Okay, that one probably slightly over spec with the torque there. We're gonna run it. Now I can deal with the big airbox. And I'm gonna be a nice guy, and I'm gonna actually dump this out without losing the bolts. I'm gonna grab the bolts from the bottom. Okay, I dropped one bolt. So, made more work for myself. Oh, you little dirty dude. See what I'm saying? I'll help the customer out by dumping his airbox out. Give me 1 second, be a dumpster diver. Gotti. Changed that air filter on my bike earlier. So, now that we're back, this goes in this orientation. And what I'm actually going to do is I've got to guide it in. This is going to be a little hard to see, so I'm going to take a little time to show you. And it's actually lighter than it looks on camera, so what I'm up against is where this goes in, back there. There we go. You see that square? I need to feed this fresh air duct in there. So I'm holding the camera right now, so I really can't quite do it with one hand, but that's what I'm going to be doing right here. Feeding them in there. Okay. And I guess, I don't do this often enough to remember every step, but I guess that's kind of starting that one bolt earlier, making sure I got enough flexibility to be able to get it where it needs to go. Which can still be a little tricky, huh? A little tricky. Should be close. I'm gonna actually pop the last of those airbox bolts. They're kind of in my way, so I just popped them out. Now what I'm doing, I'm lining up the holes. I'm looking through these airbox bolt holes. I'm just gonna make sure that the bolts started. This is a really common cross thread spot because it's definitely tempting to chuck them on the gun and start them with the gun spinning, but probably not gonna recommend that. Can't tell you how many times I've seen people having to pull the airbox back apart to try to chase those holes or tap them. Okay. Should be good. Now I could probably do that bolt, but I'm going to do all of them together. So with that, now I can play with this other ducty thing. We got to land this here, this here, and the whole time I gotta play around with this cover. So I'm gonna move the cover as little as possible to not risk breaking it. And if you really can't, just pull this whole front piece if it beats you up, and it might beat me up too. So we'll see. I might have jumped the gun on snugging that airbox up actually. No, I think I can get it. Okay, making sure my thing's in the bottom. Now all I gotta do is just tweak the cover. A little bit. I remember this one was a little tougher. This side was the tougher side. So, probably wouldn't go any more than that because that was pretty close. Okay, now that that's in there, I could start the bolts, but I'm more inclined to start dealing with these connectors. So I believe this is like a vacuum switching valve, I think. So connect that one in, the blue one. I have the lines roughly where they need to go. Just make sure, well, they're pretty easy to get to. And then I'm actually gonna jump on the battery right now. So that's my goal. Tray. Landed in those little kind of dowels. Tuck that negative cable up. Battery. Hold down. And actually, the truth is, AAA did the battery for the guy, and AAA lost the stud with the nut. So, which I did not notice when I went to do the inspection on it. So I actually really should have had him get one, but we're gonna make it work with just the one bolt here, at least till I can get him to get a replacement. So now, as soon as I make these connections on the battery, technically it's startable, but because I don't have all the rest of the sensors in, I probably wouldn't recommend it. Because you'll have mass airflow codes, and you get a check engine light, which you could clear, but I personally would button it all the way up before you try to start it. So as soon as you turn the key on and those sensors are disconnected, you get a bunch of codes. Okay. So good. Airbox time. you can see it's really not a lot of work. But if you have no idea what needs to come off and what can stay on, it looks a little confusing, more so than anything. So I'm working this airbox in on the top. If it gives you trouble, you could lube it a little bit, like some silicone or something. It'd be sweet. But I'll work it as is. I gotta get it to fit over here. Okay, now what I'm doing, remember those pieces? Make sure that they land here. So see that one? Didn't quite get in there. You gotta kind of do both of them at the same time. Okay. All right, don't make me look dumb now. Okay, now I got one. I think I got both. Okay, now what those both do right off the bat, I'm gonna buzz our bolts down here. Those are another one. Don't over tighten those. They'll bust right off. The little nut that's in there will twist, and then the nut will twist inside the plastic. You won't actually break the metal. You'll break the plastic that supports the nut. Then you're kind of screwed. So, in fact, my next step, I'm actually going to buzz that hose clamp down for the duct. These are another ones. You don't want to over torque. You don't really want to over torque anything, but I'm just pointing out the most sensitive of the sensitive ones. Okay, so now mass airflow sensor connector, and the wire harness usually lands in like a little hole there. This one didn't, so I'm not sure if it was like that from the factory or maybe somebody snapped the clip off way back in the day. I don't know. And then the purge valve, purge solenoid, click, and then the purge hose that I described disconnecting that I didn't show you. I like these clamps, are my favorite because you can definitely do them by hand. Easy, easy. I could probably almost do it with those two fingers. Like with the nice leverage, they're sweet. So slide that back to the old markings. Looks like you got to go just a hair further. Okay, now it's right back where it was. That's cool. Over here, this is where I feel like sometimes the vacuum lines can be a little bit of a mess. And I actually should have been a little more careful with making sure I got them up, because I got a few that are hanging low. I gotta make sure I get them up here. So number 1 and 2 right here, they like to stay where they came from, so it's not a, it's, you know, I don't make a real big thing to put them, to mark them or anything, but if they've been in place, they're really easy to know where they go because they're kind of molded to shape. And then these, so this one, actually, these should have been, these hoses got tucked to the wrong side. So that's on me. That is on me. These need to get pulled under to this side, right? And then one of them's, zoom out, baby. Zoom out. One of them's a little smaller, one is a little bigger. Hook them like that, get the red out of the way. Now you can see really apparently by the shape, one of them goes straight right into the airbox. One of them curves right into that switching valve. Okay. Okay. This one was actually missing. So this one up here. So I might actually have to look up and see where that one goes, but it kind of, I really don't know. That one wasn't there. So I may do a touch up to the video, but as it is, it was missing and I don't have a good answer. Whoops, my negative should have been disconnected a little better. I'll land my positive. So everybody's got an opinion, like an elbow, but I'm gonna tell you why it's a better idea to connect the positive. It's got nothing to do with electrons leaking or anything. Right now, I'm tightening my positive, and if my wrench falls over here and touches ground, I made a huge short. But right now, if my wrench touches something metal like a ground, it doesn't matter because the ground is disconnected. So snug up the positive and then do the negative. And everybody knows it, but it's not always well known as to really why. And that is really why. So The only little bit of a bummer was the stud that was lost and the one vacuum hose that was missing. But after film, I'm gonna dig. Maybe I'll find it laying down somewhere or something. But in the meantime, we got 2 more things to snug up, and you can see there's the nut for the starter. So this is obsolete because I used the original one. These are the only 3 bolts left. 1 second. I had to take care of the dogs real quick. Okay, so the last few little items, right? We're gonna get these bolts in here. There's one. There's this middle one. Now I haven't verified this starter, but it's a Bosch, so it's gonna be fine. One more bolt right here, and then you know, these are M6. They're gonna be like 8 foot-pounds or something. They're gonna be very low. That one I didn't get started right. I'm gonna redo that one. So, okay, this is where I may cheat a little bit. I may pull this over. Done. 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 Job is done. Minus the missing things. Okay, you ready? Here's the verification. And I always keep the window down. That way you can't lock your keys in it. Bingo, baby. Now we're running. Okay, job complete.